Hi, I'm Kimberly, and I've been teaching middle school science for 4 years. I think of myself as a construction worker with a tool belt full of tools that will help me teach. I collect tools from various parts of my life, and this interdisciplinary tool belt helps me with my teaching duties. I like to develop engaging lessons for my students, and my creativity comes from many different places. For instance, my lesson on writing a science rap was inspired by a documentary I watched. My persuasive essay on the use of genetically modified mosquitoes was inspired by a conference, and my mini-scale models of Texas were inspired by my love for modern art. Last year, I noticed that I was running out of tools, so I decided to go to graduate school at UTSA. The focus of my undergraduate degree was on content, so I was looking for a graduate school that could expand my knowledge of curriculum and instruction. Meanwhile, I could gather tools that would shape my pedagogy and help me be a better teacher. This class has opened my eyes to the gaps of knowledge in my undergraduate program and professional development. The first class objective was to recognize the socio-political nature of education. The readings had us look at different learner populations to analyze how they were being served in schools by teachers, how the educational system was built to help them, and in what context they were being served. This made me analyze how I was teaching, and I continued to ask myself, how well do I really know my students? After this class, my goal is to be a more uplifting teacher. I want to hold my students to a higher standard so they can achieve their dreams, but also feel prepared to handle the obstacles in their path. The second class objective was to explain key aspects of foundational theories in interdisciplinary learning and teaching. The readings from Module 2 really brought to my attention the many benefits of an interdisciplinary education. It helped validate the current program I am in at UTSA, but it also made me realize that I could create and provide for my students in their science class. I can incorporate other subjects and make cross-references to show them how connected all subjects really are. My goal is to create an integrated project for my science class that incorporates music, history, and writing. The third class objective was to understand key themes in diverse educational contexts. The readings made me rethink my style of teaching and the resources I was using. Too often I rely on methods that have worked for me, expecting similar results in my students. I realized that there are different factors for each of my students' education and development. I need to identify the factors that will help them make connections. I also need to use learning theories that will help them show growth. The fourth class objective was the application of key theories in diverse learners. I was familiar with most of the learning theories in the modules, but I never really stopped to analyze how I could use them in my class. The reflections made me think about the application of each theory in my class. The learning theory app helped me look closely at how I was going to break down the steps of Vygotsky's constructionism and use it for a group project. The professional development helped me take a closer look at LGBTQ students in my class and how I could use a theory to inform others to be better and more considerate teachers. One of the first objectives in class was to recognize the socio-political nature of education. The socio-political nature of education starts with social justice for all minority students. The idea of the education debt from Gloria Ladson-Billings' article From the Achievement Gap to the Education Debt states that it's not just about white students doing better at tests, it's about the different ways throughout history that African American cultures were denied a platform in curriculum. After looking at the history of education from Claudia Golden's article, A Brief History of Education in the United States, it is easy to identify how African American curriculum started with a disadvantage and was continually set back by laws. For me, the most influential reading this semester was The Socio-Political Nature of Education, has been from Jean Agnon. Her research from social class and the hidden curriculum of work on the different types of teaching for the different social classes shook me to my core. I recognized myself in the teachers that were both at the working class and affluent school. I teach at a Title I school, and her reading made me question whether I was just keeping my students busy to pass them to the next grade level, or was I making them better at learning, or inspiring them to be better and more creative. I also feel that Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed is still relevant to what is currently happening in politics. I teach a mostly Hispanic population, and I can now see that I need to help my students recognize their own oppression and help them transform and free themselves from the restrictions that society wants to place on them. Another objective was to explain interdisciplinary learning and teaching. The tool that I collected was the understanding of the value in an interdisciplinary teaching and learning environment. This is my second interdisciplinary degree. During undergraduate school, I enjoyed the benefits of a content-based education, diverse in science, math, and curriculum. From Modi Nassani's article, 10 Cheers for interdisciplinarity, I saw the benefits of interdisciplinary teaching that would allow my students to become more creative and better problem solvers. I consider myself a creative person and realized it was due to my interdisciplinary learning. As an avid reader, I can make connections between current events to the subjects I teach. This enables me to make learning more relevant to my students' lives. My passion for modern art has increased my knowledge of history, which makes me see more connections to science or math. I have a curious nature and I try to cultivate this in my students so that they can make connections themselves and see that subjects overlap even in middle school. Another objective was to explain theories on diverse educational contexts. The tool I collected was to be able to identify different factors for my students' education and development. When I first started teaching, I thought back to how I was taught using the direct teach method. My assumption was that if it worked for me, then it would work for my students. What I failed to think about was, what if I was the exception and not the rule? After that thought, I had to look at the research that would help me be a better teacher. For the first 3 years, I stayed away from the headache of group projects. After a training on project-based learning, I started to see the value in group projects, and Lev Vygotsky's social constructivism would support the need to create more group projects where student collaboration is essential to problem solving. My group project required a lot of individual and group brainstorming to develop an idea. I broke these activities into steps so that I could observe group discussions, and in the end, the value of the project didn't come in a grade. It came from student-work relationships, connections to the content, and creative design process. I had one class where I struggled with student apathy. The Adult Learner, A Neglected Species reading by Malcolm Knowles had some tools that I felt could be useful, such as making the lesson immediately relevant. When a student asks, "Why are we learning about biodiversity?" I can show them a connection to the diversity of some of the fruits they like apples or bananas. We can look at disease and genetics of the banana fruit to show how the lack of diversity happens. I can also see that my students are working towards self-directing and some need guidance and practice. If I offer more menu choices for assignments, they can practice self-directing. As they work to complete a project, they can develop checkpoints to show they are progressing. The last objective was to assess how key foundational theories address diverse learners. Last year, I had 160 students. Some students came with labels such as English language learner, autistic, dyslexic, above grade level reading, dysgraphia, or gifted. As a middle school teacher, I automatically made connections between the readings and my students. I also have a toddler and I plan to teach at the college level. I started to think about the different groups of students these readings could apply to outside of a middle school setting. As a mother, I can see the development of my child as she moved from Piaget's sensory motor stage to the pre-operational stage of cognitive development. In one moment, we're playing peekaboo, and the next, she is telling me a story in complete sentences. As a middle school teacher, my students are moving between concrete and formal operational stages as they start to tackle abstract ideas in the classroom. I can see lights come in on their head when they tackle a difficult topic. I want to light their learning lamps, and I must be mindful of their differences when I differentiate their lessons. The reading had me look at other diversities that my students have and what I could do to address those needs. From Anyan's article, I began to think about the differences in my students' population that lead me to teach them differently. I had to look at the different educational experiences of the students in my class. I teach a Title I population that is not required to take any computer classes, so they come to class not even able to log into a computer. Yet, my magnet school kids must take technology for 2 years in middle school. Instead of integrating the use of technology for my students who needed it the most, I stayed away from computers and did paper-based assignments. I realize now that to prepare them for high school, I should have incorporated more computer assignments to increase their comfort with technology. In helping with professional development days, I have seen the difference in teaching an adult population from the student population. The short lessons I taught were always hands-on with lots of teacher participation, so they shared experiences could further the workshop goal, and then they were practiced so that the lesson was modeled and easy to repeat with students. I did this because of years of professional development. I was able to see what teachers preferred, but Knowles helped me understand why teachers prefer to learn a certain way. So now that class is over, you may be thinking, what now? What am I going to do? The article had me realize I want to be a different kind of teacher. My first objective as a teacher was to be fun and instill a love of science. What I didn't realize was that most middle school students like science and lose the passion in high school or college. During the readings, I thought about what I could do now to give them confidence to keep pursuing science, even when it gets tough. During the learning modules, I polished and collected more tools from my learning tool belt. These modules were about different learning theories and how we could use them in our classroom. One tool that I developed was a reward and punishment system based on behaviorism from Skinner. I can use positive reinforcement to reward my students for behaviors that I want to encourage, like completing homework or bringing in supplies. I can also use negative reinforcements like calling home to discourage undesirable behaviors, such as swearing or arriving to class late. Another tool that I've collected is from Piaget's cognitivism. It is to understand the difference between concrete and abstract learners to develop better hands-on activities. I can also look at my students' zone of proximal development from Vygotski's social constructionism to measure my students' independent problem-solving ability and what they can learn from solving the same problem as a group. For example, I can give an individual quiz before an investigation to identify individual student knowledge, then have them perform an investigation with a group. Afterwards, they work together to answer a group quiz. I can measure the before and after quiz grades to see if the students' learning increased. Situated learning from Levy and Wegener had me analyze what learning groups I am a part of and what my role in each of those groups is. I am naturally introverted, so I start off in the peripheral of groups, and I gain confidence over time to become more of a leader with the experience I have gained along the way. After reading Paper's constructionism learning theory, I realized that my class needs more inquiry-based assignments. I need to develop new lessons so that the connections they make are from a hands-on process rather than a read, write, memorize process that became overused last year. The readings and artifacts in this class have helped me develop my classroom tools so that now I have a brand new tool belt with tools and new ways to approach student learning. Thank you for listening. Please see a list of references at the end of this for the articles I read, and please take the time to read a few if you're interested in how you can be a better teacher.